welcome back to another episode of the Prosperous Empath. If you've been here for a while, then you've likely heard me share that in a prior capacity, I used to serve as a coach trainer. And I'm really excited to have our guest, Dave Tierney, on the show today because Dave actually attended a coach training observation session and got to experience me facilitating and leading a room of coaches. And he shares in our episode today that my presence impacted him. And that is not at all surprising to me as an empath, because I think that empaths tend to feel and sense like-minded creators and colleagues more so than other types of entrepreneurs. And so we formed a relationship and we've stayed in touch over the years. And something I really appreciate about our guest today is that he and I are really different. We come from totally different backgrounds, different walks of life, different faiths, and we just have a natural connection. And today's episode is just a really deep dive, authentic, heartfelt conversation around creating a safe presence. And Dave feels like the perfect guest to talk about this because Dave has been a full-time pastor since 1986, and he's also a certified life coach. He brings a natural, non-judging curiosity to his conversations, and he helps clients really ponder their own point of view through asking simple, inquisitive questions. He's served communities in Washington, D.C., Maryland, Texas, Georgia, Minnesota, Ireland, and Scotland as a minister, coach, consultant, and community volunteer. So on the episode today, we really dig into his perspective on creating a safe and secure presence, the role that the nervous system plays in Dave's work, and what it really means to hold space, the benefits of asking more, deeper questions, the significance of being a safe presence, the key ingredients for nurturing strong relationships, especially in these recent times of social isolation that we've all experienced during the pandemic, the strengthening effect that harsh feedback can have on trust within relationships, as well as how to truly master the art of giving feedback. It is such a deep question, and it's also really personal to me because creating a safe presence is so important in running a mastermind. If you don't create a collective space where people feel comfortable not only sharing their struggles and their obstacles, but also in sharing their wins and their celebrations, then you truly are not leveraging a transformative collective space to foster change and tap into human potential. So this conversation just feels so relevant to my own values and shared beliefs around the absolute importance in creating a safe space in order to truly tap into human potential and unlock the zone of genius for a mastermind in thriving. I hope you enjoy today's conversation. Let's jump in. Hello and welcome to the Prosperous Empath Podcast, designed especially for empaths and highly sensitive entrepreneurs just like you who are committed to achieving holistic success. I'm your host, Catherine Wood, Master Certified Coach, author, mastermind leader, and founder of Unbounded Potential, a boutique coaching firm for empathic entrepreneurs. I'm on a mission to bring empathy back into the world of business. Each episode will focus on achieving more by doing less through leveraging empath-friendly leadership practices, boundaries, rituals, and systems, all the while continuing to care deeply about ourselves, others, and the world around us. If you are committed to joyful living and running a conscious business, but amassing wealth while doing so, proving that you can have both in a society that tells you you can't, then you are in the right place. Join me here each week to find out how. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review so you won't miss an episode. Plus, you'll find all the show notes and helpful resources over at unbounded-potential.com. Dave, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Hey, I'm excited to be here also.
I was trying to remember when we first met one another. I think it may have been 2018. Could that?
At least, the 2018, maybe in the fall or in the spring of 2019, somewhere in that.
Very cool. Well, I love
pandemic.
Yeah, pre-pandemic.
Right. That's how we're actually referring to our time anymore, right? Pre-pandemic, post-pandemic.
Yeah. Well, I'll be excited to kind of weave that into our conversation. It feels very applicable to what we're going to talk about today. But before we get ahead of ourselves, for my listeners, Dave and I initially met at a coaching preview session for accomplishment coaching, which I was a coach trainer for at the time. And Dave was coming as a visitor to attend. And I don't know, Dave, I think we just had a natural connection. And it's been fun to stay in touch over these years.
It has been. Yeah, we had that breakout session afterwards that was very enlightening.
Yeah.
And I noticed just how much you noticed, of the room and people. I was pretty impressed by that.
Well, thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, before we get ahead of ourselves, why don't we start? I'd love to invite you to share your pronouns and your story. I'd love to start there. Okay. You're welcome to share as little or as much as you want.
Yeah. He, him. I was born in Washington, D.C., grew up in that area, have lived in Minneapolis, Texas, moved back to Baltimore 20-some years ago. I've been married for 37 years to my wife, Lisa. We have 4 adult children and 2 grandchildren, and 1 grandchild is just a week and a half old now. So that's pretty exciting.
Congratulations.
So that's really, and one of the things I just love about this time of life is that I just have such a good relationship with my children as adults. Because there are times that when they were teenagers, I wasn't so sure about it. But as adults, my daughter the other day said, Dad, as you're getting older, you're getting cooler. I said, I think it's that you're getting older and you're recognizing how cool I've always been. So I've also been a pastor, a full-time pastor for 37 years, and pastored in Minneapolis and in Baltimore and a little bit in Washington, D.C. So kind of hung out with a lot of people and in a variety of life situations.
I bet. I wish that I could have come to service with you before I headed up the coast, but who knows, maybe one day.
You never know, right? That sums me up. And, I've enjoyed, I know some of the things that we talked about being a safe presence, safe space. And that has always been a very important aspect in my life. Really as a young man, when I was, my childhood was a little rough, a little bit abusive. And that's where I found in the church a very safe space for me. And I really appreciated that. And really, it just became part organic of who I am. I haven't always been a safe presence, and not always a safe presence now, but really work at trying to be that with people.
Well, I love that that's the topic that kind of emerged for this conversation, because I think the idea of being a safe presence as a coach, as a pastor, as a healer is of supreme importance. Right. And so I wonder, maybe we could just start with some context setting. When you say safe presence, what does that mean to you?
That is an important aspect, because what is a safe presence? When I just put it down to a very succinct definition is, I will always try to have your best interest at heart. I will see you with dignity. I will respect your opinion. I will treat you with civility. And if need be, we can have difficult and hard conversations that will have no effect on how I feel about you as a person. Part of being a safe presence also is, and it's difficult because when we were talking about how I noticed what you noticed was our faces kind of give us away, right? And as people were talking in that breakout session, you said, okay, Dave, I'd like to hear what you're saying because you've made some interesting facial gestures. So I was like, oh, I need to be careful about that, right? And that's because I didn't think I was being paid attention to, and because it wasn't my conversation. And, we need to be very careful how we respond. And I think a safe person doesn't react, but they respond.
Mm-hmm.
We all have things. We all have those trigger words, topics, whatever, that want us to have that knee-jerk reaction. I find knee-jerk reactions never work that well when you're dealing with people. But if you can just stop and pause, really listen to what they're saying, trying to understand what they are saying, which is very important. And a lot of people feel like if you are trying to understand what they're saying, then you're agreeing with them. That's not true. You don't have to agree with them, but you should try to understand them and then respond. There's something about that pause that helps to gather your thoughts.
I think that's such an important point. The idea that, when we're creating safety for others to process anything, really, their celebrations, their challenges, all of it, that as the holders of space, it's so necessary to pause and take a moment, because I think we so often react from our own inner interior world, right, versus honoring space for them to process their own internal world. And I think something that comes to mind for me as you say that is the idea of nervous system regulation. And having the capacity to note our own internal responses, and to be able to regulate within us if we feel protective or defensive or irritable, and as an empath, to be able to discern what's mine versus what am I potentially projecting from them. I wonder how nervous system regulation plays into your work and into your capacity to hold space.
Yeah, as you're talking a little bit about that, I'm thinking about emotional intelligence, right? Understanding our perspective. And it is dangerous when you say, the danger in having the best interest of the other person at heart is you need to make sure it's their best interest, not your best interest, right? So you need to be able to speak into their life for them, not for yourself. And you have to be aware of your preferences. You have to be aware of really your traditions, your beliefs, how you tend to respond to things. You have to really think through of what are your values and not try to project those onto somebody else. That's really difficult, right? That's so difficult. But it is giving them that ability to find things on their own and to really express things on their own. I think part of it too is that we have to come to an understanding that it's okay for them to be wrong about something. And it's even more okay for us to be wrong about something. We have this whole idea that we have to be right. Well, maybe some things, there are things that need to be addressed that way, but most of life things, we can give grace and kindness and space. And sometimes the truth is in the middle. Right? So I don't know if that answered your question, but those are things that I found that are very important for providing that safe presence for somebody.
I was just thinking of your work as you were speaking, and, there's some extra layers in your work because, as a coach, I'm only responsible for my client.
Right.
So I have their goals in mind, and, they're declared and objective and smart, but you might be working with some congregants, and then there's their family.
Right.
So I wonder, how do you honor their best interests? I'm curious how that plays out?
So, when somebody comes to talk to me in a pastoral role, um, I listen to what they have to say. I give guidance because that's what they're asking for is guidance. So it'd be spiritual guidance uh, but I also make sure they know nothing gets shared outside of that role. And it is hard sometimes because, like a spouse will come and say, well, I know so-and-so is talking to you. And they said that they brought this up to you. And they said it was okay for me to talk to you about that. I went, I don't know that.
Mm, I
And
appreciate that.
yeah. And they look at me, well, I just told you. I went, yeah, I still don't know that.
Well, so that actually makes me think about your coach training, because when we first met, you were considering training to also have the coach certification, and you've since done that.
Right.
So how does your pastoral care and the ways in which you support your congregants, how has it changed now that you have the coach training as well?
Oh, I ask a lot more questions. Instead of giving that direction, I ask a whole lot more questions. And, one of the things I have to remind them is, and I think coaches have to do this anyway, you have to remind the person, my questions are curiosity at work, not questioning what you're doing as far as a judgment or a disapproval, or because sometimes they say, well, you're asking a lot of questions. I mean, well, yeah, that's the point of coaching. It's to help you get right down to the very core of what you want, and then allowing you to create some growth steps out of that. What is the next thing? I've had some people just leave and say, wow, that was just kind of relentless, the questions. And I don't mean to be relentless, but sometimes you have to be a little relentless. But have found that they really appreciate it because they'll come back and they say, I've been reflecting on those questions. You've made me think so much deeper. And, part of it is you have to just let them go. As a pastor, you're supposed to shepherd them some. But as a coach, I'm not shepherding. I'm just holding them, maybe, if we have an agreement, to hold them accountable for their next steps. So sometimes that gets a little blurred in a pastoral role.
Mm-hmm.
But when I work with people that are outside of church as a coach, it doesn't get blurred at all. I find that fascinating, actually, that I don't blur those things. I do a lot of self-talk about don't give advice, don't say anything, don't give advice, just ask questions. But that's because I'm recognizing my own preferences.
Yeah.
Which is so important.
It is so important. And also, something that I always try to do is, it's our agenda. When we're offering advice as coaches, it's typically our agenda.
Right.
So our worldview, our perspective, our experience, which doesn't leave as much space for them to process and discern their own. So I always try to be responsible for naming it and also giving them permission whether they want to hear it.
Well, I do that too. I'll just say something like, if they seem a little stuck and I think I have something, may I just share something with you? I said, this is my story, or this is my thought, not yours, but maybe this will help trigger something for you, or, act as a catalyst for you to start thinking through things. A lot of times I tell people it's okay to just come up with what you think are the dumbest things on earth to say, because sometimes when I say things that don't sound very well, well thought out, it gives birth to something that is well thought out. A lot of times when I'm talking to people too and coaching, I just tell them, I said, I'm just giving you space to think out loud in a non-judgmental, safe environment. You can say whatever's on your heart and you will get no judgment from me.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a huge part of being a safe presence, is the judgmental free space.
Yeah. Since we talked, there is another aspect of being a safe presence that came to my mind as I was listening to another podcast. And I'd like to share that a little bit because, when we talk about being a safe presence, a lot of times we talk about coaching or counseling or when somebody is going through a difficult time. But I really hadn't thought really through the safe presence when you're going through a good time. Mm-hmm. And how important that is. There's a guy named Martin Seligman, and he does a lot of things about optimism. And he talked about healthy responding. And I love that idea, healthy responding. So not just, and studies have shown that it's not just in difficult times, but actually what builds better relationships is healthy responding in good times.
So what does that look like?
Okay, so it's interesting. So he talks about this, if you just kind of do a block diagram, okay? So, on the left-hand side, the vertical, you have active responding, then below is passive responding. Then on the left-hand side, you also have destructive on the horizontal, destructive and constructive. So you have active destructive, passive destructive, active constructive, passive constructive. I know it sounds a little confusing, but it actually is fascinating when he was explaining it. So I'll give you just my own illustration of this. Let's say you're there, your spouse comes down and says, "You won't believe this. I just won a baking contest or Martha Stewart's show or whatever, some cooking show, and I'm going on TV. I'm going to fly there and be a part of it. And I'm so excited." Okay, so active destructive responding would be, really? Did they actually taste what you baked? I wouldn't get your hopes up about being invited back. That would be active destructive. Passive destructive would be, so do you have to pay for the flight? So you're not really being critical of what they did, but now you're wondering what are their critical negative aspects, that are going to be entailed to this. An passive constructive response would be, that is really good. So what's for dinner tonight? And I think that's where we get into the danger part. That's kind of that doesn't help the relationship. It doesn't hurt the relationship, but it doesn't really help the relationship. But an active constructive response would show that you actually were paying attention. Oh, are you talking about your Irish cheesecake recipe? Yes, of course you would have won for that. That is so amazing. Oh, they're going to love that. We should go out and celebrate because I knew you could win this.
A couple of elements of the active constructive that I appreciate and that I've also heard shared over the years is that the willingness to be specific,
yes,
to share specific feedback about what they're celebrating actually Absolutely. Deepens the celebratory feelings.
Right. And that takes practice and it takes awareness. But the studies have demonstrated that's what really builds strong relationships. Now, the passive constructive is kind of neutral. Passive destructive, active destructive, of course, not neutral, kind of negative. And it's actually just taking time to bear witness to that person that they matter and what they do matters, which is really a great gift that we can give to people, that you matter, right?
Totally. So I have some selfish reasons for why I'm so excited to have this topic with you. But before I share them, I'm mindful that in your note, you mentioned that you wanted to talk about this topic because you'd shared a couple sermons about being a safe presence, right, and that they were deeply resonant with your congregation. And I'm wondering, what inspired you to want to talk about this in your sermon? Like, why does it seem so relevant in your world right now?
So when I do messages at my church, there are two ways that I do them. So I'll do a topical message. I'll just pick a topic that I think the congregation needs to hear. But I also will take a book of the Bible from time to time, usually once a year. I'll take a book of the Bible and we'll just go verse by verse through it. I don't know. I was thumbing through some of the books of the Bible, was praying about it. I was trying to think, and I thought, I think I'll do 1 Samuel. Okay, that's an Old Testament book that most people would go, "You've got to be kidding me." Right? You're going to do 1 Samuel. Yeah, I think I'll do 1 Samuel. Well, it all fits right in with 1 Samuel. The story starts off with this woman named Hannah. She's married to Elkanah. he also has another wife. I don't know why anybody wants two spouses, but he has another spouse. Peninnah, Hannah couldn't have a child. Peninnah made fun of her. Peninnah had a whole bunch of kids, would make fun of Hannah. Elkanah would come to her and says, well, I don't understand why you're crying. Why aren't you eating? Why aren't you crying? And I mean, this is his question year after year after year. A little slow on the uptake, right? And then he finally says, really, what the worst thing anybody can say. Well, you have me. Aren't I worth 10 sons? I don't think so. So, well, what happened was, as I'm studying this, I heard this podcast about constructive, destructive, active, passive, responding. I was like, well, there it is. And when she did have a child, which carries on in 1 Samuel chapter 2, you can see how they were, the Eli, the priest, and Elkanah, the husband, actually were constructive in responding to her. So when you look at chapter 1, I mean, she's crying. She finally leaves her home. She goes to the tabernacle, which is like a church service. She goes to the church. She's praying, but she's weeping, probably that weepy-eyed, snot-filled prayer, praying. And the priest comes out and accuses her of being a drunk. That's not safe. Here she went to the place she thought was a safe space, and she got accused of being a drunk. I can't even imagine what she must have felt. Here, first she's in her own home that wasn't safe. She wasn't getting the support that she really needed. She went to the one place where she thought she would find support and safety, and he really rebuked her for being a drunk. Now, to Eli's credit, when she said, "Oh, no, I'm not drunk. I'm not drunk," he did a 180 and blessed her. So it just seemed to fit right with I've always kind of appreciated, and until I really started digging into 1 Samuel, I never saw it. So that's why I did the sermons on it. It fits so well.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I really appreciate that, and I appreciate you sharing that story. And I'll have to admit, I don't know if I've read 1 Samuel.
That's okay.
But I think given the times that we're in, we're still in this post-pandemic world. And I read this article recently about kind of what we're experiencing as a collective right now. And I think she said it better than I've read recently. And she was like, we're all experiencing this collective trauma right now in the world that we don't have research to explain, that we don't have history to tell us how it's going, that we don't have the support to process what we're experiencing. And, everywhere around us, we're seeing people not wanting to go back to work, resigning, quiet quitting. There is such this collective shift in our workforce. And I think that it is absolutely creating this ripple effect in some of our primary relationships because we're not doing that internal work to heal our own trauma individually or collectively. And so, not surprisingly, and very naturally, in fact, it's coming out sideways at the people that we love and depend on most.
Right. Yeah. We've become so more isolated, right? I think the pandemic really heightened that isolation for us. Probably made us wonder what we were doing also, how we were spending our lives.
Mm-hmm.
I have noticed, church attendance hasn't regained like it was, but they watch online. Yeah. Okay. It's not the same as being present. I'm not quite sure how to reach out to that or, helping people with that. It is all new territory. There's just a comfort of being alone now. And we can have our social media. It allows us to have our friends and our enemies, and video games and TV and just cocooning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's interesting. You use the word comfortable, and it feels more like coping.
Yeah, I think maybe so. But we can be very comfortable in our dilemmas, right? Because it's what we know.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, even just reflecting on my own experience, I'm an introvert by any definition, but I certainly became even more introverted and more of a homebody during the pandemic and thrived in that capacity, to be honest. Like, I had my husband working from home, so I had my 2 dogs and my husband and my garden and nature. Like, by any standard, I was cared for. And yet, after the pandemic, I really recognized a void in my social world, really needing more of that connection. And I shared with you before we started recording that, I've been dealing with some sickness in my immediate family lately. And I made a personal commitment that I was going to spend even more time with friends and get outside of the house even more, because, that's really what my heart was needing, not to process anymore alone with my dogs. They're my loves, but truly I needed more laughter and social connection. And it made a huge difference. So I think there really is this kind of, we all need to be really looking at, how are we coping versus how are we caring for ourselves?
Right. I'm a pretty high introvert. When you do like a Myers-Briggs or any of those studies, I always come out as a pretty high introvert. And a friend of mine who's a psychologist, he said that a lot of people don't recognize that introverts actually need people more than extroverts, which I never heard that before. And he goes, oh yeah, you need it. You need to get out of the room. You need to be out among people. He said, really, being an introvert that's where you're getting your energy and recharging, but you just can't stay in the recharger the whole time. You have to get out. And I recognize some of that. When the quarantine happened, I created my quarantine. Okay, my quarantine were 4 people outside of my home that we would limit our contact with others so that we could get together. I mean, we'd get together at a park or something like outside. I mean, we were trying to be careful because nobody knew what to do during the pandemic. And so we would meet in the parks. We'd have lunch together. We would chat, but keep our social distancing. And actually, physical distancing is a better term. Social distancing, I think, kind of gave us that mentality of actually social. We can't socialize at all, but you can if you kept your distance. That really helped. If I didn't have that, I don't know. I had my wife, I had the kids, I had my dog. That was 2 dogs at that time, which was great. But I really needed some outside contact, and I was able to do that. I think we really forget how much we need others. We are social creatures. We are not built to be loners. Even loners are not built to be loners. We need one another. And we need people who want the best of us and who can speak hard truth to us, that it's welcome. It may not be pleasant, but it should always be welcome. And I can listen to somebody say something harsh, hard, maybe is a better word, difficult maybe, about something in me that they saw that maybe I wasn't aware of. If I know that they have my best interest, and I can especially see that they're a little hesitant to share it, I really appreciate that. Now, if they're gleeful for sharing it, I'm not so appreciative of that. So but you don't want that kind of friend either, right? Like, oh, let me tell you what's wrong with you. No, that's not being safe. And I don't know. I think the friendships that we maintain is so important. What is the old saying? We are the sum of the 5 people we spend the most time with. I don't know if that's always true, but I think that's a lot of time true.
Yeah, you shared some real gems there. I mean, I love that quote. And I think it is important to be really intentional around who you're surrounding yourself with. Right. What are their beliefs? What are they standing for? How are they exhibiting courage or bravery, or really embodying the values and just beliefs that are important to you and perhaps shared or different, but you can respect and admire. And I love the piece that you just shared about, how when the people we trust have some hard feedback to say to us, and they can acknowledge the difficulty, or perhaps it's vulnerable or uncomfortable for them, or even if they can preface it with, gosh, I have something to share with you and I'm, a little uncomfortable sharing it, or I'm not sure if you're open to hearing this, or in a place in your life where you're ready to hear this. Are you open to some, hard feedback? And then giving them the opportunity to say yes or no. I think that, to your point earlier, it really deepens trust in those relationships. Wow.
Yeah. When I talk to my friends sometimes and I see something I really want to express to them, I say, I really have something difficult to share for me and for you. It's not anything I want to really do, but can we talk about that just a little bit? And they're so appreciative about that. And when they respond in the same way up to me, I really do appreciate that. Maybe not at the very moment, but oftentimes soon after. And I think we need that. A friend of mine, he was going through a workshop, and he was supposed to ask everybody, tell me 5 good things about me and 5 bad things about me. I went, oh, bad is such a terrible word. Can we change it to challenging things about you? And I asked him later on how he liked that exercise, because he had to ask 15 people to do that. I'm like, I don't know what I want to hear. 45 bad. 15. 45 bad things about. Would be 65 bad things about me. And he says, it was difficult. It was not easy. And I said, I think they should have asked 5 good things, 2 challenges, right? Because we always obsess about the things that are being criticized.
I do a similar exercise with clients, but I only ask my clients to get external feedback around their strengths and their gifts and their essence qualities, because typically, we're very well practiced in speaking to our fear-based qualities or our areas for growth. We're typically in better relationship with those aspects of ourselves than we are with our greatness.
Right.
So, that's interesting.
Yeah. He did say that it was good. It was hard to hear, but he said what was very interesting was there's a variety of things in the good, but almost everyone was unanimous in the 5 challenges. I thought, wow, I don't know that I'm brave enough to do that, And I try to be mindful of that, because part of my job, I have to do staff reviews. And I remember with one staff member, this was years and years and years ago, I went through the review, talked about things I was really impressed about. And I said, okay, so I'm going to talk about some things that I want you to work on, but this is what I need you to do. And I reached down in that pit, brought out a beach ball. This is the good that you have done. This is impressive. And I put it on the table. Then I reached down and took out a little ping pong ball. These are the things you need to work on. Look at the difference. Big beach ball, good. This challenge. I know you're going to obsess about the ping pong ball. Don't obsess about the ping pong ball. Pay attention to the ping pong ball, but don't obsess about it. And the person was really appreciative of that illustration, in which I stole it from somebody else, because that's what you're supposed to do, right? You take a good idea, make it yours. But I thought it was such a profound thing to help this person who I knew would be difficult, would obsess about the couple of little things that person needed to work on.
Mm-hmm.
And they found it affirming. I think that's part of trying to be a safe presence too, right?
Mm-hmm. I definitely think there is an art in giving feedback and doing it effectively so that your feedback can be received and heard. One of the ways I've shifted my giving feedback over the years is I used to share feedback by saying what worked and what didn't work. And for me, that was always hard to hear what didn't work. So I've shifted it over the years to say what worked and what I'd like to hear even more of. So essentially, it's like, what can you expand on? Like, what can you lean into? What can you bring more of? So it just feels like it's so much more of an encouraging and an expansive way to share feedback versus to deconstruct or to break down someone.
Yeah. Yeah. Because then they just they could actually spiral out of control a little bit or second guess everything they're doing. And I don't want that. And I'm fairly active with giving both positive and corrective feedback, with my staff. It's kind of funny. It took them a little bit of time getting used to. I'm very casual. I'm kind of joking around. But if there's an issue that comes up, which sometimes issues do come up that are very serious, I'll come out and go, so this is my serious voice. And so this conversation is going to be really difficult. And then I say what I need to say, and I say, okay, that's it. So let's go back to happy. And they're just like, oh, okay. And then I'm not trying to, be dismissive but I just wanted to show them that this is something that needs to be addressed because it's out of the ordinary. And I think that's the other issue that we have, trying to be a safe space, is that we are kind of wired to notice what's wrong. And that's not necessarily bad. There's a book called Exuberance. I don't remember who wrote that. I read that years and years ago. And it's about, they've done studies about our brains. So the lower function of our brains notices things that are wrong. Well, that's important. That's how we survive, right? So we notice, that looks like the bridge is gone. We shouldn't probably go down there. Or that's a dark alley. I don't think I'm going to go down there. Or you come home and your front door is open when it shouldn't be open. I probably just forgot to shut it. Well, maybe there's somebody in there. So that's a lower function of our brain. But to appreciate is a higher function of our brain. And it takes training. In the Bible, the Apostle Paul talks about that whatever's true, whatever's noble, whatever's right, we're supposed to focus on those things. And it is a training of constantly looking at building one another up and not just making something up. When you genuinely see something, you just express, hey, that was a really great job. You did fantastic. And being, as we talked before, being very specific about what you saw. And, but that takes that does take some training. I think when I first started noticing this, so my son, eldest son, he was just starting to learn to drive, and he was in the back of the van, and somebody cut me off, and I wasn't kind, I wasn't patient, and I just said, oh, jerk. And he said, hey, listening to you, it sounds like everybody is a bad driver. I thought, that's interesting. Now, I want to tell you that what I did as a response to that was out of the nobleness of my heart, but it wasn't. It was actually kind of, you've annoyed me, so I'm going to annoy you a little bit. And so for the next couple of weeks, whenever my oldest son was in the van with me, we would come to a stoplight. I would, oh, look at all the cars. They have stopped. Yay, everybody. And then, oh, look, they're going. The green light, they're going. Oh, now it's our turn. Look, we're all moving. Oh, did you see that guy use his turn signal? Good job with the turn signal. And he's like, okay. But as I was doing it, you know what I noticed? Most people are pretty good drivers. They stay in their lanes. They're not veering all over the place. I mean, there's a few, but the overwhelming people drive pretty well. But sometimes we don't think that, do we?
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of people do their jobs really well. But what gets the attention is when something's not right. And I think that's unfortunate. So I try to pay attention to what's right. I have to pay attention to what's wrong, too. but there's so much more that's what's right.
Mm-hmm. I love the piece about building each other up. I mean, I think that you've spoken to so many elements of building and creating a safe space, right? The idea of building each other up, sharing active, constructive feedback and communication, bringing humility, prefacing and asking for consent before sharing hard feedback. I also hear just the reminder to bring our own vulnerability, and sense of humor. So I want to share with you why I personally was excited to have this conversation. And it's because I run a mastermind for women entrepreneurs. And I love the transformation that is available in groups for so many of the reasons that you just said, because I think that when we build each other up, we can build faster in community than we can alone. I think we're mirrors for one another. We can hold each other and carry each other forward when we don't feel, strong enough to do so on our own. And creating and maintaining a safe presence to process people's challenges and celebrate people's wins requires a lot of vulnerability. It requires a lot of nervous system regulation. It requires a lot of humanity. And I think that I've learned a lot for myself over the years of running a group, how to hold space when people bring difficult challenges, when there are feelings of comparing to one another's journey, or taking people's comments personally. Right. I think there's so many different elements that can either build and expand a community and create more safety in a group space, or take away from it.
Right.
So I wonder, you create a safe presence for a whole congregation. So I would love to hear your learnings over the years. What has allowed you to stay grounded in your beliefs and your values and your faith in the presence of so many different life experiences.
So some of that is by not handling life experiences correctly, right? So you learn, I can say when I was younger, it was very difficult because everybody, when you're a pastor, everybody in the congregation sometimes will have lots of advice for you of how you should speak, what you should say, what you shouldn't use, what Bible you use. I mean, it's just, and I took it also personal. When I was, in my 20s, I'm like, oh my goodness, am I doing this right? Am I doing this wrong? I really had to and then I tried to be somebody I wasn't. And that was just making me miserable. So I decided I have to be who I am. And when people would come with something, I'd listen to them. Maybe there's something in there that I would go, yep, I see that. Being willing to accept that criticism, or that advice. It took some time to be able to do that. I also learned that when somebody said, well, I need to come by to talk to you, I said, can you just share what you would like to talk about? Because your mind can go to the negative so easily. Oh, what did I do wrong now? And so it helped me to be better prepared for them. And sometimes it wasn't about anything except I just want to talk. Oh, okay, that's great. But also had to come to understand whether that is or not, that whatever their motivation is, I'm just going to assume that their motivation is good. Because sometimes when we think other people's motivation is not good, that's a more reflection on us. There's a verse, Titus 1:15 says, to the pure, all things is pure, to the corrupt, nothing is pure. And the whole idea is basically like if you tell the truth, you think everybody tells the truth. If you tell lies, you think everybody else tells lies. So I had to really get my head wrapped around what am I expecting from them? And if I think they're going to be negative, does that mean I'm negative? And you know what? Sometimes I was. And I had to really work on that. Train my mind not to be so negative. And so that was a hard learning experience. And now when I talk to people, I just I try to recognize their backgrounds. I try to recognize maybe, their life experiences, what's happening in their life right now. And when we talk, I try to hold that and then pause. Don't respond. And I really try to control what my eyes are doing when they're talking. Don't roll your eyes. Don't do that. This was a bad habit I had that I really had to break. If somebody was saying something I disagreed with, I would just smile, but I would just start shaking my head. I was like, oh, no, no, no. So then they're getting all worked up. So I just had to listen and nod and really just value what they said. Even if I disagree with it, I'm going to value what they said because I'm going to value them. And I think that's what comes across to the people that I pastor. I'm not perfect at it by any stretch, but I do get a lot of affirmation that I listen and that I care for them. And that's pretty humbling.
Mm-hmm. I think my audience are mostly empaths. And I think that this is such powerful input for empaths as deep feelers and the deep processors that we are, having that willingness to not take our clients or our friends or family member or loved ones' reactions personally, to not make it about us.
Right.
To really create that space for them to process whatever they're experiencing without making it ours to fix or solve or make right or to apologize for. And so much of what you're saying, it rings so true for me. I'm conflict avoidant, and my husband is he has a healthy expression of anger, which I've really come to appreciate over the years. And so much of the time when he kind of gets angry about something, whatever it is, it could sound like it's about me or coming towards me. It rarely, if ever, is. But over the years, and we've been together for over almost a decade now, over the years, I've learned if I can just create space and let him keep talking, and 99% of the time, if I just create that safety for him to continue processing whatever there is for him to share, he shares how it has nothing to do with me and he's really upset about, fill in the blank.
Right.
And I'm so grateful for the work that I've done within me over the years to be able to create that not only safe presence for him, but also that ability to deepen our relationship. Because every time I can handle his anger without taking it personal, I feel closer to him and we do connect at a deeper level. And I learn from him at the same time. I'm so grateful that I can now, be angry.
Right. It's okay to be angry.
That it's so absolutely okay to be angry. And I, can express it responsibly. And what a gift to have that full range of emotions.
Right. Absolutely. And it is that holding no space. It's difficult. And sometimes that just means being quiet. But nature abhors a vacuum. So we like to fill it. But sometimes when I'm talking with somebody, I'll just sit there and I literally will count to 30. Now, 30 seconds of silence, that's a long time. But I do that. And, just smiling, allowing them to just sit there and kind of dwell in what they just said. They don't need me to process it. They're probably wondering, what's he thinking? But it's okay. Let them process. And really, what a safe person you are to allow him to have that space. That's really good.
I appreciate that. Thank you for saying so. And as you were just speaking, I was thinking about, in my continuing education for coaching over the years, I've really come to appreciate the energetic shifts and how they support a client in accessing the core of what they want, noticing the shifts in client's energy or the volume with which they speak or the tone with which they speak, or changes in their facial movements or their hands or crinkling of their eyes or, their mouth into a smile. And just how much, as coaches, sometimes I think we we just create space through silence. But there's so much wisdom in the silence if we're willing to really tune in and sit with it and allow our clients knowing to emerge and look for the hints in whatever way, shape, or form they emerge.
Yeah. Yep. When I was thinking about the holding space, I really learned a lot, just not only with my wife, but my 4 children. I don't have to fix things. With my kids especially, and my wife, if there's something I'm a fixer, let's fix this. And I would get frustrated with my kids mostly, especially when they were teenagers. But then all of a sudden it dawned on me, their friends kind of did the same things. And I was so much more patient with them. And I gave so much more grace and space for them, but not for my own kids. So I backed off on that. So I just said, okay, I'm going to just give them more space. And I remember one of my other sons, he was talking to me a couple months ago, and I was just listening. But I'll be really honest, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, we could fix it this way, this way, this way, this way. I'm going down the checklist. This is what you need to do. This is what you need to do. This is what you need to do. But I'm not saying any of that. I'm listening and thinking, okay, don't say anything. He's not asking you to fix it. He's not asking you to fix it. Just let him talk. And then he looked at me and says, I know you don't want to tell me how to fix it, but I really need you to. What amazing moment that was, because I figured out how to show my own kids that grace I was showing everybody else. Because sometimes in our relationships with our spouses, with our children, with our parents, with our siblings, we don't show as much grace. I don't know if it's the proximity or that we think we should know better. I don't fully understand why. Why would we not show the same grace that we would show a stranger? And there's a lot of practice that you can have in your own home about how to be a safe person. So I appreciated that moment with my son.
What a beautiful example of all of the work that you had done in order to get to that place where you could give the space and the grace for your son to really ask for what he needed versus decide for him.
Yeah, it was nice. It was good.
Well done.
Yeah, because about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I probably would have been, this is how we're going to fix it. This is lifelong learning, right? That's what we should be doing.
Totally. And those old habits, they linger. Like I certainly can appreciate for me, whereas I no longer, fix my husband's challenges or offer him my master coach insights. I've learned to really create that space for him. But now as my parents age and I'm taking, more of a role in their care, I certainly notice those old habits show up there, and I'm having to relearn those same learnings in these new places.
Yeah, you have to keep learning.
Absolutely,
you have to keep learning.
Well, I have appreciated this conversation so much.
I enjoyed it. Thank you for letting me come on.
This is a very different topic and conversation than I usually talk about on the podcast. Usually we talk all about business for empaths, but I think what I appreciate is how interconnected this conversation is with empaths being able to prosper and thrive, because we don't operate in vacuums in our lives. How we show up in one area of life affects who we be and affects how we show up everywhere else. And, for empaths, like so much of our business is run on relationships and the ability to maintain lasting, authentic, deep ones. And this conversation is such a powerful one, just filled with gold for how our listeners can do just that. So thank you for sharing your brilliance and your ministry with us. And I'd love to ask you the question I ask all my guests, which is, what has supported you in becoming a prosperous empath?
Well, certainly my wife has been really huge in that, helping me understand who I am and affirming. And also a couple things, but number one in all of that is really having people around me that are healthy for me, that can speak into my life, that can remind me of my strengths when sometimes I doubt my strengths. They can come alongside of me and let me have space to vent or to really run my ideas past them. I love the idea that, sometimes when you share it, you immediately know, oh, that's a terrible idea. In your head, it sounds okay, but as soon as you say it in front of somebody else, oh yeah, that's just not good. And they just go with it. And I love that. So that's really important. Then the other thing is I try to listen to podcasts that really speak to me and on a variety of topics. And even from people whose viewpoints I would probably disagree with. That's a huge thing. And then I like biographies. I read biographies all the time. And lately I've been falling in love with these people that I've been reading about. And I'm like, wow. And the sensitivities that some of them have. People that you would be surprised at as being kind of empathic in their nature. And they really kind of inspire me to be a better person and to be more sensitive to those people around me. So that's what I've been doing.
I love that. Those are some very new answers for the podcast, but the one that really kind of screamed out to me was the willingness to surround ourselves with healthy people.
Yeah.
And I think that is so important, especially for empaths.
Yeah, I call them my lifelines, people that I know I can count on.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, Dave. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Good to see you again.
Same.
Thank you so much for listening today to this episode of the Prosperous Empath Podcast with me, Catherine Wood. Make sure you subscribe and leave a review so you don't miss an episode and so more empaths just like you and me can find the show. As a thank you, each month, one lucky reviewer will receive a 60-minute coaching session with a member of our Unbounded Potential team. You can find all the show notes and bonus resources over at unbounded-potential.com. Thank you so much for listening and locking arms with me to bring empathy and prosperity back into the world of business.